Gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I rise today in support of H.R. 2630, the Campaign Expenditure Transparency Act. This is legislation that I introduced with my colleague, Representative Castle, in early June in order to ensure that federal office holders and candidates are not personally enriched from the expenditure of campaign funds. I want to thank Mr. Castle, the Majority Leader, the Chairman of this committee on House Administration, for working to bring this bill to the floor today. Numerous members of Congress employ their spouses and family members for campaign activity, and the vast majority of them do this work appropriately and ethically. Unfortunately, others have not, and this practice has shown the potential to foster corruption and invite abuse. I joined my colleague, Mr. Castle, in introducing this legislation because I believe that it will help preserve the integrity of the institution and end the perception that office holders and candidates can benefit themselves financially from their campaigns or service. The Campaign Expenditure Transparency Act would end the practice where federal office holders and candidates employ their spouses in their campaigns and financially benefit from contributions to the campaign. The bill also requires a separate disclosure to the FEC of all other payments, including direct and indirect compensation, which are made to immediate family members. Specifically, H.R. 2630, as amended, would prohibit any federal office holder or candidate from directly or indirectly compensating his or her spouse from any political committee he or she controls for services to the committee. This language was used to ensure that someone could not get around this prohibition by acting as a subcontractor or vendor to another individual or company receiving payments from the political committee. Additionally, this would ensure that the legislation does not prevent a spouse from being employed by a company that provides a service to a political committee unless the spouse's compensation is increased as a result of that business. For example, a spouse could be employed by a phone company that the campaign contracts with, so long as the spouse's compensation is not increased based on that contract. Similarly, a spouse that is a shareholder of a publicly traded company could receive dividends from that company, notwithstanding the fact that a committee purchased services from that company. The legislation also does not prohibit committees from paying for legitimate travel and campaign expenses that are incurred by a spouse, as long as the FEC has determined the expenses to be appropriate campaign expenditures. The bill recognizes that spouses are often properly involved in campaign activity and that committee funds can be used to reimburse appropriate expenses. The Campaign Expenditure Transparency Act, as amended, stipulates that the penalty for violation of the provisions of the bill, if the candidate knew of the violation, would be imposed on the candidate and not on the committee. The amended version of the bill also clarifies that the penalty is not reimbursable expense by the committee. Legislation has the support of a number of reform-oriented organizations, including Democracy 21, the Campaign Legal Center, League of Women Voters, Common Cause, Public Citizen, and U.S. PIRG. I would also like to stress that many of our colleagues, again, have employed their spouses or immediate family members in their campaigns, done so lawfully and ethically. Our family members are frequently our most trusted advisors and are willing to put in long hours for little compensation. However, we are aware of cases in which this practice has been abused, and it's for this reason that this legislation is regrettably necessary. Given the low public confidence in all public institutions at this point, this legislation is one important way to begin restoring the public's faith that elected officials are working in the public's interest and not in their own. I encourage my colleagues to support the legislation, and I want to take just a minute to address some of the comments that my friend from Texas has made. First, of course, there's nothing in this legislation that would break up a good team. There's nothing in this legislation that prohibits spouses from working. And where, like most families these days, both members of the household need to work to support that family, there's nothing in this bill that would stop it. It does provide that a spouse that has CPA skills or other skills employ those skills on someone else's behalf for compensation. They're more than welcome to provide those skills, as many of our spouses do. I think almost all of our spouses do, on a volunteer basis to help our campaigns. But the appearance of propriety, and in some cases the actual impropriety, having spouses working on commissions where a percentage of everything the campaign raises effectively goes into the household of the office holder, is driving forces behind this legislation. I should mention that in my colleague's own home state of Texas, the state legislature and the governor have passed and signed legislation prohibiting this practice in Texas. So if you are running for the state legislature in Texas, or you are an office holder in the state legislature in Texas, you would not be able to employ your spouse and pay your spouse out of campaign funds. That is a misdemeanor in Texas. So there are states that are really leading the way in terms of making sure that we avoid any appearance of impropriety. And I think the Congress, given the problems that have been manifest in this institution as well, needs to follow the example of some of those forward-thinking states. At this